Kindness to life. All are of one self-fraternity. Such being the dictum to avow. In such a light how can we take life? And devoid of least pity go on to eat. The non-killing vow is great indeed. And, greater still, not eating to observe. All in all, should we not say, zero men of righteousness? Even to this amounts the essence of all religions. If killing were applied to oneself, who, as a favor, would treat such a dire destiny? As touching all in equality, zero ye wise ones. Should that not be our declaration for a regulated life? No killer would there be if no other to eat there was. Perforce, himself must eat. In eating thus abides the cruder ill. In that it killing makes. Not killing makes a human good. Else an animal's equal he becomes. No refuge has the taker of life, although to him all other goods accrue. This short composition of 5 verses shows that ethics arises directly out of the contemplative way of life. In fact, we see here how contemplation and matters which primarily concern the commandments of a religion can be brought together under one general principle of wisdom and rational living. The ethic here is dictated by the inner voice of contemplative reasoning, when a man wants to be fully human. Leaving aside on the one hand Epicurean, hedonistic or utilitarian views of life which are based upon satisfactions too ordinary for the dignity of man. And on the other hand preventing such commandments from becoming mere dead letters, which might happen if divorced from all human considerations. The Guru here follows a line of contemplative reasoning which is full of true humanity and dignity. The pious man of prayer seeks refuge in God while denying what might give a similar refuge to animals. The contradiction in such a unilateral attitude of prayer, with the subsequent conflict which it brings about, is forthrightly abolished here, with a tenderness that is touching and which even has some humor. All are of one self-fraternity. Such being the dictum to avow. In such a light how can we take life? And devoid of least pity go on to eat. When piety and kindness are hinged one on the other they together constitute an important article of faith, a law or axiom of contemplation. In the very first verse, Narayana Guru relates it to the axiom of the Advaitic or non-dual reality of the self. The self is universal and unitive and therefore cannot countenance conflict between life and life. This is the first corollary arising out of the pure contemplation of a priori truth. When it is accepted that killing is wrong, the same holds good a fortiori with the question of eating. Kindness emerges naturally as the argument of the second degree which partakes of the logic of the emotions to at least an equal measure as it is itself based on pure reason. To the Advaitin one is as valid as the other, since the principle involved is the same. The need to be kind to one's fellow creatures does not require the support of argument. One does not have to look for this justification in any book. It is self-evident and, consciously or unconsciously, humanity treats it as such. All civilized governments provide laws for the protection of wildlife, even though instituted for aesthetic rather than ethical reasons. The promiscuous destruction of nature is beginning to be recognized as at least undignified behavior for those calling themselves civilized. However, much vagueness clings to this subject. Some consider kindness as being sentimental, and others as an impractical ideal. Killing in some form being incidental to life, such as that involved, for example, in agriculture. There is a condoning of killing or a conniving of it in various degrees without any real criticism. There is even a popular saying in Malabar that the sin of killing is abolished by eating. Killing a man is murder, except in the case of war, while slaying a beautiful deer in the woods is not. Cannibalism, again, cannot be treated as at the same level as the consumption of microscopic beings in milk or other food. Confusion between the inevitable and the contingent aspects of the question gives rise to the prevalence of an uncritical vagueness, creating a no-man's land of absurdities. But here the Guru marks out the field of rational contemplative norms of conduct in terms of the dignity of man. Man is the measure of all things, as self-realization in universal terms is his goal, when intellectually conceived. After understanding critically the position in regard to this question of killing and eating, it is for each man to make up his mind where he will draw the line of demarcation between what is necessary according to him and what he should avoid in the name of kindness. But the palate here should not be the preponderant consideration. Duty, piety, righteousness, and religion are matters involved here, more than a merely rational outlook. Here reason is affiliated to a humanitarian outlook. This attitude is of the essence of religion, whatever the verbal form it may assume. Man is seeking spiritual consolation as a refuge from suffering and sin, or even seeking emancipation in wisdom in ultimate terms of pure reason. The generosity of the absolute principle is always there as an inevitable factor to be dealt with. Whatever path of wisdom or piety a particular aspirant may place before himself as his ideal. In times of stress all men pray for mercy of some kind, and that same prayer must bind us all to acts of mercy, as Shakespeare says. A man who was sure that he would never need mercy might perhaps be the only one who could logically escape from being merciful. Only in the context of neutral wisdom is such an indifference to mercy imaginable. And when such a neutrality is really gained, it becomes tantamount to being one with the absolute. Then the question of mercy does not arise. In all other cases mercy becomes a necessary and inevitable form of obligation, even in the most contemplative of disciplines. Mercy, however, should not be mixed up with sentimental regret or retrospective self-pity. The kindness meant in this poem is that tender feeling of universal sympathy which is based on an open and rational outlook. In this first verse the doctrine of non-duality is conceived in universal terms as invoked to support the idea of kindness as an obligation to be rightfully recognized by man. Reason makes kindness binding, otherwise ethics would depend upon necessity and would be left for its support on instinct or animal nature. Non-dual contemplation requires reason to be taken as a corrective to instinct. Instincts must always be subjected to the sublimating purification of reason. Self-fraternity, Atma Sahodarar, in the original means the same as that universal brotherhood or equality in the eyes of God spoken of by religious people. Such terms as, created in the image of God, are sufficiently recognized in the study of comparative theologies of all religions to be clear to the general reader. The non-killing vow is great indeed. And, greater still, not eating to observe. All in all, should we not say, O men of righteousness? Even to this amounts the essence of all religions. There is no religion which does not stress one form or another of universal brotherhood, and which does not advocate kindness to all living things. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, which Christianity and Islam inherited from Hebraic and perhaps from Proto-Hebraic sources, confirms this view and, taken side by side with facts in practice such as the prohibitions and injunctions regarding killing on certain days and of certain animals, such as a red or stray cow or bull, we can gather, even in the religions of the non-vegetarian peoples, an acceptance, in principle at least, of the non-killing commandment. And there is the general acceptance by the Semitic religions that a form of grace accompanies fasting and abstention from meat eating on certain days. Buddhism in principle, though not in practice, in Burma for instance, is solidly based on non-hurting, ahimsa. and Jainism marks the high level of this principle. The universal principle of brotherhood of all life and general equality becomes confined to humans only, in those climes where animal food becomes more excusable than, say, in the southern latitudes of Asia. Making allowances for local differences due to necessity, non-killing, in principle, is enjoined by all religions. O men of righteousness! This verse is addressed particularly to those who think in terms of organized and active religions which try to keep the faithful on the path of righteousness and virtue by edict and law. The more contemplative religions accept it in the axiomatic form which does not require legalization. If killing were applied to oneself, who, as a favor, would treat such a dire destiny? As touching all in equality, O ye wise ones! Should that not be our declaration for a regulated life? The appeal in this verse is to those endowed with wisdom or education. Equity leads inevitably to the notion of equality. The argument here is against unilateral attitudes of equity. Reciprocated equity applied to both sides concerned without difference, and based on a uniformly general principle, becomes equality, which the wise are here asked to recognize so that they may lead humanity along such lines. Dharmyam has been rendered, for a regulated life, i.e., conducive to a life lived according to the first principles which have been stated already. When karma, or conduct, is controlled by considerations of first principles, it becomes dharma or right action. And anything which promotes the prevalence of such activities in group life is dharmyam, what conduces to a regulated life. No killer would there be if no other to eat there was. Perforce, himself must eat. In eating thus abides the cruder ill, in that it killing makes. We often hear the argument that someone else has done the killing and therefore one can eat without any qualms of conscience. The hollowness of such an argument is exposed here with a certain touch of humor. The picture arises of a lone huntsman having brought down a deer and being faced with the problem of consuming it all himself. This readily brings home the absurd relation between killer and eater, and in the argument, is not without its humorous side. Agam, evil, has been translated, ill. Not killing makes a human good. Else an animal's equal he becomes. No refuge has the taker of life, although to him all other goods accrue. This last verse appeals to human dignity and in its name puts in its final plea against killing. Even if all the other arguments should be logically unconvincing, here's an appeal to a higher value in man which is reasonable. Man becomes the equal of an animal by wanting to kill it for the pleasure of his palate or for the pleasure of hunting, which are motives of a very ordinary order, common to more uninformed levels of life. Although to him all other goods accrue, there are values in values. Those in the form of goods which we enjoy here are many and varied and may be had in a unilateral fashion, even when one is undeserving. But the essential good, as a value such as grace or refuge or sanctuary in God, comes from the unitive, presiding principle of good with which a bilateral and unitive relationship is necessary. One cannot think of bribing God for a partial favor based on no principles. To be loved by God one has to love one's fellow creatures, all in all.